The shocking truth behind Henry VIII's bloody reign. Picture this. A king so desperate for a male heir that he would tear apart the very fabric of his kingdom, execute two of his wives, and leave a trail of blood that would define an entire era. This is the story of Henry VIII, England's most notorious monarch, whose reign was marked by violence, betrayal, and an obsession that would change the course of history forever. When Henry Tudor ascended to the throne in 1509, he was everything England could have hoped for in a king. At just 17 years old, he was tall, athletic, intelligent, and charismatic. He was a Renaissance prince who could speak multiple languages, compose music, and excel in sports. But behind this golden exterior lurked a darkness that would eventually consume not just Henry himself, but thousands of his subjects. The transformation of Henry from a promising young king to a bloodthirsty tyrant didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual descent into madness that can be traced back to one single obsession: the need for a male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty. This obsession would drive him to make decisions that shocked Europe and forever changed the religious landscape of England. Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was a Spanish princess who had previously been married to Henry's deceased brother Arthur. Their marriage lasted 24 years, but Catherine's inability to produce a surviving male heir became Henry's greatest source of frustration. She had given birth to several children, but only one survived to adulthood: Princess Mary. In Henry's mind, this wasn't enough. He needed a son, and he was willing to do anything to get one. The king's solution was radical and unprecedented. He decided to break away from the Catholic Church entirely, declaring himself the head of the Church of England. This wasn't just a religious decision. It was a political masterstroke that allowed him to divorce Catherine and marry his mistress, Anne Boleyn. But this decision came at a tremendous cost. The break with Rome led to years of religious persecution, political upheaval, and bloodshed. Thomas More, Henry's former friend and Lord Chancellor, refused to acknowledge the king's supremacy over the church. More was a brilliant lawyer, philosopher, and the author of Utopia, but his principles cost him his life. Henry had him executed in 1535, sending a clear message that opposition to the king's will would not be tolerated. More's execution shocked Europe and marked the beginning of Henry's transformation into a tyrant. But More was just the beginning. Henry's paranoia and ruthlessness knew no bounds. He executed Cardinal John Fisher, numerous monks, and anyone who dared to oppose his religious reforms. The Pilgrimage of Grace, a popular uprising in northern England against Henry's religious policies, was brutally suppressed. Despite initially promising pardons to the rebels, Henry went back on his word and executed over 200 people, including the leader Robert Aske, who was hanged in chains at York Castle. Anne Boleyn, the woman for whom Henry had torn apart his kingdom, would also fall victim to his increasing paranoia and cruelty. When Anne failed to produce the male heir Henry desperately wanted, giving birth instead to the future Queen Elizabeth, the king's affections quickly turned to hatred. He accused her of adultery, incest, and treason, charges that were almost certainly fabricated. In 1536, after less than 3 years of marriage, Anne Boleyn was beheaded at the Tower of London. The speed with which Henry moved from Anne's execution to his next marriage reveals the cold calculation behind his actions. Just 11 days after Anne's execution, he married Jane Seymour, one of Anne's former ladies-in-waiting. Jane finally gave Henry what he wanted, a male heir, the future Edward VI. But the joy was short-lived, as Jane died just days after giving birth, leaving Henry grief-stricken and increasingly unstable. Henry's fourth marriage to Anne of Cleves was a political disaster that he blamed entirely on his advisors. When he found Anne physically unappealing, he had the marriage annulled after just 6 months and executed his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, whom he held responsible for arranging the union. Cromwell had been one of the most powerful men in England and the architect of many of Henry's reforms, but loyalty meant nothing to the increasingly paranoid king. The execution of Catherine Howard, Henry's fifth wife, perhaps best illustrates the king's descent into tyranny. Catherine was barely out of her teens when she married the aged, increasingly corpulent king. When evidence of her premarital relationships came to light, along with rumors of adultery during her marriage, Henry's response was swift and merciless. He had Catherine executed in 1542, along with several of her alleged lovers and accomplices. By this point in his reign, Henry had become a figure of terror. His court lived in constant fear, never knowing who might be the next victim of the king's paranoia. The Tower of London became synonymous with Henry's reign, as nobles, clergymen, and commoners alike met their end within its walls. It's estimated that during Henry's 38-year reign, he ordered the execution of over 70,000 people, a staggering number that speaks to the brutality of his rule. The king's physical transformation mirrored his psychological descent. The athletic young man had become obese and disease-ridden. A jousting accident in 1536 had left him with a leg wound that never properly healed, causing him constant pain and possibly affecting his mental state. Some historians suggest that Henry may have suffered from conditions ranging from diabetes to brain trauma, which could explain his increasingly erratic and violent behavior. Henry's final years were marked by continued bloodshed and paranoia. He executed Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, just days before his own death, and had planned to execute Surrey's father, the Duke of Norfolk, but died before the execution could be carried out. Even on his deathbed, Henry was planning more deaths. The legacy of Henry's bloody reign extended far beyond his death in 1547. His break with Rome had fundamentally changed England, setting the stage for centuries of religious conflict. His daughter Mary would attempt to restore Catholicism through her own reign of terror, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. His other daughter, Elizabeth, would become one of England's greatest monarchs, but her path to the throne was paved with the blood of her father's victims. Today, Henry VIII is remembered as one of history's most notorious kings. His 6 marriages, his break with Rome, and his ruthless elimination of anyone who opposed him have made him a figure of fascination and horror. He was a king who let his personal desires override the welfare of his subjects, leaving behind a legacy written in blood that would haunt England for generations to come. The shocking truth behind Henry's reign is that it reveals how absolute power can corrupt absolutely, transforming even the most promising ruler into a monster who values his own desires above human life itself.